This is a mysterious building with a life of its own. It silently controls all the residents, feeding on their suffering. The mysteriously vanished baby, rooms that do not exist on the floor plan. Various strange and mysterious events occur one after another. Welcome to the German suspense horror series The House. Mr. Grendelman, after the death of his wife, moved into a rundown apartment building in the suburbs of Germany with his 16-year-old son Yuri. He planned to start over in a new place. Little did he know that he would encounter a series of problems right away. While waiting for his father to get the keys, Yuri saw a nearby homeless man rummaging through a trash can. He gave the man an orange, but this homeless man's behavior was a bit strange. He handed Yuri a black stone, saying that he would need it sooner or later, but do not tell his father. Meanwhile, Glenn, as the newly appointed building manager, was told that the keys would be kept with Mrs. Lobo. He stopped a neighbor coming downstairs to check her mail, to ask which room Mrs. Lobo lived in. The female neighbor replied that the heating of the 7th floor was broken, and suggested Glenn check the mailboxes for any keys. As Glenn was about to argue that he couldn't open someone else's mailbox, a set of keys suddenly popped out from the nearby box. After obtaining the keys, Glenn took his son upstairs. Their new home looked cold and empty, making them miss their deceased loved one even more. Yuri placed the black stone under his bed, and the tired pair went to bed to rest, and that stone was glowing under the bed. The next morning, Yuri was awakened by the cold air blast from the leaky window. Glenn told his son to make something to eat. While he took his tools to fix the heating, he first went to the neighbor's apartment on the 7th floor. The neighbor was holding a small baby in her arms. She was pleasantly surprised that someone was actually taking care of this rundown apartment. Glenn got in and started smashing the iron pipes. The noise woke up the blonde man in the bedroom. He pulled out a paper bag and inhaled what was inside of it. The man's pupils dilated, and he felt himself floating. It was clear that he was a drug addict. At that moment, Glenn finally opened the heating duct. A stream of thick, black liquid flowed out. He held out a metal lunchbox to catch it. Just then, the neighbor's child began to cry incessantly.
Was willst du?
Glenn had experience in taking care of children. He quickly took the baby from her hands. The child indeed stopped crying. At that moment, the black liquid slowly flowed out of the lunchbox. It seemed to have a life of its own. Glenn didn't notice the strange sight. He sealed the lunchbox and took it away, promising the two residents that the heating would be fixed by tonight. The homeowner, Cleo, handed the baby to the blonde man and immediately went out to work, because they planned to move away as soon as possible, to live in a more comfortable environment. However, only Cleo was working at home. Although the blonde man was good at taking care of children, the family was struggling with one less breadwinner, and even couldn't afford baby formula. The blonde man went to nearby supermarkets to steal with the baby in his arms. However, the supermarket clerk noticed his little trick. Considering that they lived in the same building, the clerk didn't tell his boss. Instead, he told him to hand over the formula and leave quickly. The blonde man couldn't leave the child with empty stomach, so he went for the hippies in the building, most of whom were drug addicts. He traded some good stuff with a pregnant woman for her breastfeed. The little one became very well behaved after feeding. Suddenly, the camera focused on the pipe opening in the wall. At this moment, Glenn was busy in the central heating room. The pipes here were also filled with the thick black liquid. As Glenn was engrossed in his repairs, he suddenly heard deafening music. He looked through the pipe and noticed that there were fires on the other side, which was a serious violation of fire safety regulations. Glenn rushed into the hippies' room and used a fire extinguisher to put out the homemade stove in the room. In the evening, Glenn returned home and had dinner with his son. He discovered that Yuri had not only fixed the broken faucet, but had also scrubbed the dirty cups until they sparkled. Yuri proudly said that using white vinegar to dissolve stains was his mother's secret. How could Glenn have forgotten this trick? He hurried to grab the white vinegar and went to the workshop to see if it could dissolve the black liquid. But when Glenn opened the lunchbox, he actually saw those liquids wriggling. After pouring in the vinegar, it produced a wisp of white smoke. Glenn opened the storage cabinet. No wonder there was a large supply of white vinegar here. Glenn poured the vinegar into the pressure sprayer and started spraying it forcefully into the pipes. The black liquid inside indeed began to dissolve. The pressure gauge was swinging back and forth. Glenn accidentally got knocked back by the sprayer and passed out. Meanwhile, the blonde man borrowed some money from the hippie and was returning home with food bought from the supermarket. He was envisioning a bright future, but when he passed by the trash room, he found himself unable to move. This place was a secret route for drug deals. Just knock on the metal lid and throw in the money. and the required items would fall from the top. Yuri, below the 7th floor, was about to throw away the family photo, to alleviate his father always being so sad. Just as he lifted the lid, he saw a sock filled with money drop from above. But the blonde man didn't receive the corresponding goods. Yuri heard the noise, and curiously peeked to see. He noticed the lights in the deep pipes flickering out one by one. Yuri was startled and quickly left. At this moment, Glenn regained consciousness. He closed the valve. Meanwhile, the blonde man could only carry the child home, because he couldn't get what he wanted. He couldn't suppress the cravings for drugs, and began to experience frequent hallucinations. The blonde man picked up the baby, and ran out of the house. The trash room emitted a warm glow. He walked inside. When the blonde man woke up on the floor, the baby in his arms was gone, and a diaper was stuck at the trash drop-off. The blonde man lunged forward, screaming. The white cloth was blown into the pipes and vanished. At the same time, the boiler in the heating room started up. The heating finally returned to normal. When Yuri returned home, his father was already asleep. He called out his and his mother's names in his dream. Yuri leaned in and hugged his father. A knock on the door sounded. It was the blonde man who came to borrow the administrator's key. Yuri didn't want to wake his father. He took the keys and led the blonde man to the trash room, but there was no sign of the baby inside. At this moment, Yuri heard crying coming from the vent. Could it be that the baby was stuck along the way? They quickly called for an ambulance. The police descended into the pipes with safety ropes. He found a puddle of black liquid on the wall. Before he could figure out what it was, someone suddenly threw trash down. This search could only be interrupted. Yuri told his father about what happened today, but Glenn was skeptical of his claims. If the child really fell into the vent, it would have surely landed in the basement. Since the baby's father didn't find the child in the trash can, it means the baby didn't fall in at all. Cleo and the blonde man also considered this possibility. They asked the neighbors if anyone had seen the baby. Just as they knocked on the door of a tattooed man, a big dog took advantage of the chaos and ran away. The tattooed man had not noticed the black liquid in the water bowl when he fed the dog water not long ago. Glenn quickly encountered the dog. As the manager, he had to resolve the troublesome, but the vicious dog soon disappeared, leaving only a patch of darkness on the wall. Glenn went to get some raw meat to try to lure the dog out. He didn't find the dog, but instead caught a greedy cat. The cat owner was very friendly and invited Glenn to come over to their house, expressing support for his work in person. The cat owner offered Glenn dinner and introduced him to their children and elderly father. This family consisted of 7 members. The cat owner took over the job of searching for vicious dogs, allowing Glenn to focus on finding the missing baby. Yuri returned home from school, and he heard the sound of a baby crying coming from the vent again. Yuri took his father's building floor plan. He found the boy Nikki in an abandoned room on the 3rd floor. They had met by chance before. Yuri wanted to ask Nikki for help in finding the baby, but when he unfolded the map, he found that the abandoned room was not on the floor plan. Nikki didn't know what was going on either. Instead, he led Yuri back to his home to find tools. As soon as the door opened, a foul odor rushed out. Nikki said his mother was sleeping. He reminded Yuri to tread lightly. Yuri scanned the room's furnishings and noticed that dust was everywhere. On the table was a photo of the mother and son. The tools Nikki mentioned were just a glass cup. Nikki explained that if they pressed the cup against the wall, they could hear the sounds from behind the wall. The simple amplification method really worked well. After checking several corridors, they finally heard the faint cries of the baby, but the corridor ahead was locked by an iron door. Nikki felt it was dangerous and didn't want to proceed, but Yuri wasn't willing to give up easily. He ran home to ask his dad for some food money and casually took the building manager's keys. Yuri came to the store with his meal money and wanted to copy all the keys. This was clearly against the rules, but the clerk Lone was a classmate of his. Yuri spent 50 euros to persuade her. By the way, Lone also had a secret of her own. She has a romantic relationship with the chess teacher upstairs in the apartment. After getting the keys made, Yuri successfully unlocked the iron door. Nikki was too scared to go in, so he waited outside the door. Meanwhile, the blonde couple heard the crying from the vent again, and immediately went to find Glenn for help. The three followed the sound to the basement, but Glenn discovered that the keys were missing. Meanwhile, Yuri also pinpointed the baby's location using the glass cup. The wall was covered in black slime. He tentatively reached out to touch it. His arm passed right through the wall. Suddenly, the thick liquid on the ground sprayed out a large bubble. Yuri felt as if someone had grabbed his arm, almost pulling him away to the other side of the wall. The wall behind him began to writhe as well. A vicious dog's head popped out, and barked loudly. Yuri finally pulled his arm back, and the dog's face vanished. Nikki was waiting at the door. Unexpectedly, he heard voices coming from the vent. He tempted Nikki to put his hand up to it. The vent instantly became scalding hot. Nikki let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Glenn violently smashed open the basement door. They saw a man wearing a skirt with a strange smile, stabbing the baby in his arms. Cleo rushed forward to snatch the child away, only to find it was just a puppet doll. The man in the dress was still gloating, mimicking the sound of a crying baby intentionally. Glenn stared at the strange man, recognizing him as the homeless man who had spoken to his son. Not long after, Yuri rushed over and told his father that he had found the baby, and that there was a vicious dog guarding it. Glenn picked up a hammer for protection, but when the two arrived at the scene, the wall had returned to normal, and was impassable. With lives at stake, Glenn directly smashed through the wall, but there was nothing suspicious behind it. Glenn believed that his son had not moved past the trauma of his mother's death, which was causing such hallucinations. Just as the two were leaving, the sound of the baby crying echoed again. Let's set aside the situation here for a moment. The cat owner was leading residents to hunt down vicious dogs. They were about to succeed. However, two drug dealers hiding at the staircase actually took the opportunity to capture that vicious dog. At the same time, the homeless man was collecting the black slime. His behavior was erratic, making people feel uneasy just watching him. Yuri was also affected by the strange stone. He dreamed of a giant eyeball appearing on the ceiling. Yuri instantly woke up from the dream. He noticed that the shape of the eyeball resembled the stone. Yuri stepped out of his room and found that Cleo had already prepared breakfast, and it seemed she had spent the night with Glenn. Yuri angrily left the house. It turned out that Cleo had proposed a breakup because of the blonde man's relapse and losing his child. She had no choice but to stay at their place. At this moment, Yuri arrived at the trash room. He wanted to throw away the stone, but the stone emitted an orange glow. He dismissed the thought of discarding it. Yuri was about to take the elevator back home when the drug dealers entered with the vicious dog. These individuals didn't press any elevator buttons, so Yuri kept a close watch. After exiting the elevator, he noticed the display and saw that the three were stopping at the 6th floor. This was very strange, because the elevator on the 6th floor malfunctioned and was closed for a long time. They had to climb up the stairs. Just as Yuri was puzzled, Nikki suddenly appeared. He asked Yuri to use the new key to open the cage trapping a kitten. Nikki wanted to adopt the kitten and invited Yuri to his home to set up a cat bed. But Yuri was preoccupied with the elevator situation, so he let Nikki go ahead. After Nikki left, he glanced at the animal remains in the cage. Then he returned to the elevator and pressed the button for the 6th floor. The entire space suddenly trembled. Yuri looked around and discovered a hidden door. He used the key to open it. Then he crawled through the pipeline into a room. It was a mess inside. A black thick liquid was boiling on the iron pot. Several pieces of black ore were scattered nearby. Yuri pushed open a wooden door and entered a compartment. He saw a giant eye painted on the wall, which looked very similar to the one he had seen in his dream. At this moment, he heard the sound of the elevator moving behind him. It seemed that several drug dealers had returned. Yuri hid under the table and quietly escaped while they weren't paying attention. He accidentally ran into the drug dealer who was holding the dog. Yuri was captured and taken back to the workshop of the three. The drug dealer boss intended to feed him some black liquid. In a moment of crisis, Yuri quickly came up with an idea and said that he had a spare building manager's key and could make a deal with them. Yuri lied that he also wanted to sell drugs to make money. The leader immediately began to explain the process. First, the buyer knocks on the trash vent. Then the dealer extends a fishing net to catch the cash. After verifying the bills are genuine, he signals his accomplices to drop the goods from above. To test Yuri's determination to join them, the drug dealer boss entrusted him with the care of the vicious dog. The nearly broken-spirited blonde man, worried about his child being hungry, dropped milk from a bottle into the trash chute. A short-haired woman taking out the trash saw this and quickly closed the door. She thought her eyes were wrong. When she opened the door again, the blonde man was already unconscious on the floor. The short-haired woman listened to his heartbeat and dragged the blonde man back to her home. Yuri was about to hide the dog when he ran into the owner's tattooed man. Yuri was punched and knocked out on the spot. When he woke up, He hurriedly looked for the dog, but was suddenly called by Nikki, who popped up. He had been waiting at home for Yuri, but Yuri had clearly forgotten their agreement. Nikki explained that the kitten wouldn't eat anything, and wanted him to come over to take a look. Yuri couldn't care less about that right now. He casually told Nikki that he needed to find something the kitten liked to eat. Nikki thought of the pile of animal remains. At this moment, the enthusiastic cat owner's kitten slipped out of the house. Nikki grabbed a strange metal tool and chased after it. The cat owner discovered his pet was missing and immediately rallied his whole family to search for the cat. He suspected Lone, who is of Asian descent, simply because of the stereotype that Asians eat dog meat.
Tut mir leid. In unserer Familie essen wir nur Hunde.
Lone immediately fired back. This time it was truly magic defeating magic. Meanwhile, Yuri quietly followed the tattooed man. He wanted to find a chance to steal the dog back. Yuri snuck into the room while the man was asleep. He cautiously approached the tattooed man and took the key to the dog cage. Yuri accidentally kicked a bottle, but the tattooed man mumbled a few words in his sleep and continued snoring. Yuri hurried to open the dog cage. This time he truly startled the tattooed man. He was knocked down again. After punching and kicking him, the tattooed man felt it wasn't enough, and even grabbed a stun baton from the table. The vicious dog was inexplicably very excited. It broke through the cage and tackled the tattooed man, biting him. Yuri vaguely felt that the dog was protecting him. It might be related to that stone. After he kicked away the stun baton, he led the now docile dog away. The 24-hour deadline set by the drug dealer boss had passed. Yuri returned the dog to him, officially passing the test. At the same time, the insurance claims manager came to talk to Glenn. Through their conversation, it became clear that Glenn's previous house had caught fire, and his wife had died trapped inside. Yet the insurance company had continuously delayed payments, which is why he and his son lived in this rundown building. The manager pointed out that the fire safety system was turned off when the house caught fire. His words imply that Glenn intentionally set fire to defraud insurance. Not only did he not receive a penny, but he also had to appear in court for trial. Glenn's face grew darker. The black slime also slowly seeped from the vent into the electrical box, filling the internal space and overflowing. The insurance manager was completely unaware of the imminent danger and continued to haggle with Glenn. As long as you give me half of the payout, I won't submit the evidence to the court.
Wer weiß, dass Sie hier sind?
Niemand. Ich bin privat hier.
Glenn's question clearly showed he had murderous intent, but before he could act, the electrical box behind the manager suddenly exploded, and he was about to be crushed to death. Glenn pulled the manager aside. The manager didn't expect him to help. He was touched and voluntarily returned the evidence. He stated that the compensation would be processed in a few days. After saying this, the manager hurriedly left. He hadn't gone far before getting lost. His phone had no signal either. The manager leaned wearily against the wall, only to find the surface was sticky. The manager felt uneasy and hurried his pace. He discovered the homeless man in a dimly lit corridor. When he tried to call for help, his feet suddenly sank, and he slowly sank into the black mire. When Yuri got home, he found Cleo hadn't left, and his father was still holding him, searching him. Yuri pushed him away in anger and ran off. He wanted to stay at Nikki's house for the night, but Nikki wouldn't open the door, so Yuri had to leave. Meanwhile, Nikki went into the kitchen, where the kitten he found was devouring its own kind. The voice from the vent once again tempted Nikki. Everyone will abandon you, whether it's Yuri or your mother. Only I will not leave you. The next moment, the oven door opened by itself, and Nikki crawled inside. Yuri hid in the drug dealer's workshop to sleep. Unexpectedly, the drug dealer boss suddenly returned. He had chosen to accept Yuri. The drug dealer immediately began counting the cash. Yuri asked about the painting on the wall. The dealer said he dreamed of that eye every night, rather than being scared and unable to sleep every day. He would rather force himself to face his fears. The next day, Glenn received a call from the resident Mrs. Schubert, complaining that there was a terrible stench on the 10th floor, and wanted him to come handle it. The 10th floor Mrs. Schubert mentioned was indeed Mrs. Lobo's apartment. Since no one answered when he knocked, Glenn opened the door and went in. A nauseating smell of decay hit his nostrils. The furniture in the room was covered in ashes and cobwebs. Wasn't the arrangement of this room just like Nikki's home?
Er hatte einen Sohn, aber der ist vor langer Zeit davongelaufen.
Bleiben Sie bitte draußen.
Glenn opened the bedroom door, and the stench grew even stronger. He lifted the blanket. Mrs. Lobo had long since become a skeleton. The shriveled mucus attached to her skull and spread all the way to the bedside wall. The black circular pattern resembled a large eyeball. In fact, from the first time Yuri visited Nikki's home, the groundwork for the boy's ghost identity was already laid, as well as the stench of decaying corpses. It must be that stone. That allowed Yuri to see Nikki. Glenn called the police to have the body removed from the apartment. He and the police officer crowded in the narrow elevator. They endured the foul smell with expressionless faces. Lone is at the supermarket, watching the police leave. Her father locked today's earnings in a safe. Lone had always disapproved of her father's behavior. He earned money but never spent it, only knowing how to save, allowing those white people to treat them like servants. These were things she could only vent about to her secret lover. Lone began to think about that money. She didn't want to inherit the store as her father suggested. Lone wanted to see the wider world. The drug dealer boss took the dog to meet the supplier for a deal, and that supplier was the homeless man.
Du kennst das Problem mit Dingen, die du an der Kette hältst. Die Kette hat 2 Enden. Und je schwächer es, desto stärker wird der Zug von der anderen Seite.
As soon as the words were spoken, the vicious dog vanished. The homeless man laughed and left. What he sold to the drug dealer was the processed black slime. With a little processing, it could be turned into a solid state. This substance is highly addictive and extremely dangerous. Many residents in the apartment were addicted. The homeless man relied on this substance to indirectly control the entire building. At this moment, he crawled into Mrs. Lobo's apartment through the oven, holding Nikki's toy car in his hand. The homeless man reached his hand into the black hole by the bed. The light inside grew increasingly intense. In a daze, the homeless man glimpsed the source of this substance. It came from a distant planet. At this moment, 2 thieves sneaked in to steal something. They must have heard about the death in this household and wanted to grab something valuable. They walked past the corpse of the pet cat and entered the bedroom. They didn't notice the homeless man standing against the wall, and he slipped behind the wall and eavesdropped.
Hast du die Geschichte gehört von dem Sohn, den die Alte hatte? Und eines Tages hier bloß verschwunden heißt es.
The homeless man hid behind the wall, opened a can of tomatoes, and stirred. A vortex appeared on the ground with his movements. Then the homeless man gripped the tomatoes tightly. The thief felt a tightening in his heart. His companion quickly pulled him away to escape, but the latter still died. Glenn noticed that his son was getting too close to the drug dealers. He caught one of the henchmen and warned him to stay away from Yuri, or he wouldn't be able to stay in this apartment. After Glenn said this, he entered the elevator. But unexpectedly, it broke down halfway. The emergency phone also couldn't get through. He opened the skylight and leaned out to check. Before Glenn completely fell unconscious, he seemed to hear his wife's voice, and then his consciousness sank into a haze. The black slime gradually spread toward him. After being threatened, the drug dealer's henchman immediately went back to protest to the leader, demanding that he kick Yuri out of the group to avoid attracting the annoying building manager. Yuri just happened to overhear this conversation. He raised a knife intending to ambush, but how could he defeat the drug dealer, and was immediately subdued in return. Yet the drug dealer boss was determined to protect Yuri. There has been a rift between teams. The drug dealer boss took Yuri back to his home. His mother sat in the room in a daze. The boxing trophies on the wall were covered in black slime. The drug dealer boss grabbed the bald man at the table, introducing him as his boxing champion father, who had been glorious in his youth, but in old age only abused his wife and children. The drug dealer leader whispered in his father's ear, which scared him so much that he lost control of his bladder. On the other side, Cleo, just off work, went to check the mailbox for the day, and saw a letter from the 13th floor that read, "I can help you find your child." Cleo immediately went home to call the number. The sender instructed her to bring a photo of her child to the 13th floor. A middle-aged woman opened the door, claiming to be a fortune teller. The middle-aged woman burned the photo of the child and instructed Cleo to repeat her words. The room was filled with smoke. Cleo saw that the child had grown up and was playing by himself in the room. The old woman said that what you just saw were all things that would happen in the future. You only need to wait patiently. Cleo gratefully pulled out all the cash on his body. As soon as she left, the old woman took some black mud from the fire pit and stuffed it into her mouth. It turned out that what Cleo saw was merely a hallucination, induced by inhaling toxic smoke. No wonder everyone was so eager for this stuff, because it allowed people to see the images they wanted to see. Yuri and the drug dealer boss arrived at the rooftop. He wanted to know what the other had said to his father. The drug dealer boss asked Yuri if he remembered those dreams, that I told me some words.
Zusammen können wir den Block beherrschen. Verstehst du?
Yuri couldn't understand what he meant. He rejected the drug dealer boss. His situation was different from the others. Yuri knew his father loved him very much, and he just wanted to go back and apologize to Glenn. But the house was empty. Yuri called out for someone everywhere. Finally, he found his father in the malfunctioning elevator. Glenn told his son to go fix the elevator. Yuri quickly went to the machine room on the 11th floor to restart the disconnected circuit breaker. He looked down the elevator shaft from the 11th floor. His father told him to stay away. Unexpectedly, the drug dealer boss gave a sudden shove. Fortunately, Yuri managed to grab the edge in time, but the elevator doors were about to close. Yuri couldn't hold on and fell down. With a loud crash, Glenn saw his son's arm hanging down. The elevator had just restarted and was rising. If this continued, Yuri would undoubtedly die. Glenn smashed the elevator button to force it to stop. Yuri fell from the 11th floor and only suffered a full body fracture. Glenn urgently needed money now. He went to inquire about the compensation. After contacting the insurance company, he found that the manager had gone missing. Without his signature, the insurance payout couldn't be processed. After Cleo learned of Glenn's difficulties, he brought a newspaper ad for hiring an electrical engineer. At this moment, many moths emerged from the vent. One of them hid in Glenn's collar. In the evening, he went to the hospital to bring food to his son. The moth quietly flew out and landed on the nearby light tube. Yuri felt a sudden headache, and under the bed in the apartment building, the black stone glowed once again. Then it turned into liquid and seeped into the ground. These substances seemed to not want Yuri to escape control. Glenn needed to earn enough money for medical expenses and move out of this place soon. He promised Cleo that he would go for the interview. That day, Mrs. Schubert, who reported a foul smell on the 10th floor, spat out a mouthful of blood. Her husband mocked her, asking if she was dead yet. This old man was also an addict. He didn't care about the life or death of his family. Mrs. Schubert knew she couldn't delay her condition any longer. She went to the hospital, taking the opportunity to visit the injured Yuri. At this moment, the boy was leaning against the bed, drawing. Mrs. Schubert was very surprised when she saw this. "Aren't you the one who just moved in recently? How do you know Lobo's son?" The person Yuri was drawing was Nikki, but Lobo's son had been missing for 30 years now. Yuri's mind was filled with thoughts, but his face appeared very calm. After experiencing a series of strange events, he was not surprised by anything that happened in that house. Glenn changed into a suit and set off for the interview with Cleo's encouragement. As soon as he stepped outside, he encountered an accident. The car just wouldn't start. He opened the hood and found it filled with black liquid. The mysterious substance wouldn't allow the residents to escape the apartment. Although Glenn took a taxi and arrived at the company on time, but he saw a puddle of slime stuck to the sole of his shoe. He hurried to the bathroom to clean it off. Unexpectedly, when he looked up, he saw the black liquid crawling up the mirror. Glenn suffered too much stimulation, had epileptic seizures, and collapsed to the ground. He missed the interview. Cleo was unaware of the accident. She bought a whole chicken and put it in the oven, wanting to treat Glenn well. At this moment, the phone rang. She walked over to answer, but heard no voice. Then a baby's crying came from the oven. A tiny hand tapped against the glass. Cleo was taken aback. She didn't even put on gloves as she took out the baking tray, but there was only a burnt chicken inside. She was punished for recommending a job to Glenn. At this point, we should also check on the blonde man, who was dragged away by the short-haired woman days ago. He was imprisoned in her home. He stared blankly at the television. Meanwhile, the short-haired woman took over the blonde man's job. Every day, she took a bottle to the trash disposal area, singing while pouring out the milk. Meanwhile, Lone, planning to steal money, set her plan into motion. She took all of her father's savings and carried a pile of luggage to find the chess teacher, hoping he would take her away. But the teacher had already found a new student, the daughter of the cat owner. After her father discovered the savings had been stolen, he returned home and sat in silence all night.
Ich hatte auf einer klugen Tochter reden sollen. Nicht immer nur sparen, auch leben.
Her father comforted Lone, saying it was just money, and that they could earn more. Lone felt guilty, and quickly returned the deposit, but she had already betrayed her father's trust. In the evening, Glenn sat in the office drinking alone. Cleo wanted to comfort him a bit. "It's just one interview, there's no need to lose hope." But Glenn countered, "Is the hope you're talking about the illusion the medium showed you?" Cleo got angry, slapped him, and left. However, when she returned home, she found the blonde man was gone. In this deep night, everyone was in such pain. Cleo picked up the black substance left by the blonde man, and couldn't resist inhaling it. The orange-red light dispelled the darkness, bringing the most beautiful illusion. That night, Lone discovered her father had already left, and he had taken her mother's portrait. At this moment, a moth in the hospital perched on the 4 bottle, staining the medication black. Yuri slept heavily, when suddenly, the burn patient in the next bed leaned over, and covered Yuri's chest. The black liquid flowed back in an instant. Yuri woke from his dream. He saw that the bed next to him was empty. He asked the nurse where the burn patient had gone, but she replied that there was no patient here. We can infer from the burn clue that the burn patient is Yuri's mother, although it's unclear if she is alive or a ghost. She saved her son. Yuri left the hospital and decided to return to the apartment. Meanwhile, Glenn received a call from the apartment management, who reminded him that it's best not to seek employment elsewhere during his tenure. Glenn was afraid of losing his job, and quickly agreed. He didn't know that the phone line had long been contaminated by the black substance. Yuri returned to the apartment. As soon as he entered, he saw the surveillance camera overhead. It was surely newly installed by his dad. Sure enough, when Glenn saw his son on the monitor, he was about to scold him to hurry back to the hospital, when suddenly, he felt a chill down his spine, his scalp nearly exploding. A woman in a sweater approached. Glenn immediately recognized it as his wife's voice. He struggled to convince himself that this wasn't real. He remained rigid and still, until all the strange phenomena disappeared, and Yuri had returned this time to find Nikki. He ran into Lone in the hallway. Lone wanted to find something to occupy her mind, so she decided to help Yuri look for someone. The two of them arrived at Nikki's door. Before they could unlock the door, Glenn's warning came through the intercom. Yuri ignored his father, and took Lone into the room that didn't exist on the floor plan. The two of them instantly disappeared from the monitor. Yuri remembered that Nikki had hidden a spare key behind the wall. After feeling around for a moment, he opened the door. This was originally a communal activity room. In the corner stood a huge freezer. When Yuri opened it, he found it filled with rotten food. There is a group photo in the black slime. Just as he was about to reach in to pull out the photo, he was yanked into the freezer. Yuri felt himself sinking deeper. Lone hurriedly pried open the freezer door with her cane, and pulled Yuri out with all her strength. He took out the group photo and discovered that it matched perfectly with the hole on the bulletin board. The people in the photo were gathered around a baby. The caption read, "This building welcomed its first child." Just after they left the activity room, they were stopped by Glenn. He felt that his son wasn't fully recovered yet, so he told Yuri not to go to school for now. Of course, staying at home doing nothing wasn't a solution. Glenn arranged for his son to help him monitor the surveillance, and to document any violations he saw. Glenn was determined to restore order in the building. After assigning his son his tasks, he took the camera to install it in a blind spot. Meanwhile, Yuri asked Lone to call Mrs. Schubert to inquire about the photo. However, Mrs. Schubert couldn't recall the details from that time. Yuri thought that if they gathered everyone from the photo, they would surely remember some details, but how could they gather the old residents together? Mrs. Schubert suggested that the building's 40th anniversary was approaching, and they could hold a celebration event. Then Lone falsely claimed that she forgot her keys to distract Glenn, and Yuri took the opportunity to announce the celebration over the intercom. He invited the longtime residents to gather in the activity room at 6 in the afternoon. By the time Glenn wanted to stop it, it was already too late. On the other side, Cleo fell into a downward spiral. After becoming addicted to drugs, she was in a daze. One day, as she passed by the garbage room, she heard the sound of a lullaby coming from inside. This is the favorite song that blonde men sing when coaxing children. Cleo couldn't help but lean in to listen closely, until the short-haired woman came out holding a bottle. Cleo's suspicions grew. She followed the short-haired woman, and noted her room. Cleo pressed against the door to catch any useful information, but suddenly, black liquid began to seep from her chest. The next day, she waited nearby for an opportunity. As soon as the short-haired woman left with the bottle, Cleo broke in through the door. She saw the blonde man sitting in front of the television. He looked dazed, and didn't recognize Cleo. His feet were chained to the radiator. Just then, the short-haired woman returned. She ignored Cleo, and asked the blonde man if he had tea today. Cleo opened the teapot. Finding it filled with black liquid, she knocked the short-haired woman down, wanting to wake the blonde man, but unexpectedly, the latter got up and knocked Cleo down. When she regained consciousness, the blonde man had recovered his memories, but he countered, "Why do you want me to remember those painful memories?" Upon hearing this, Cleo left the house of that twisted woman. Meanwhile, the short-haired woman didn't care about Cleo at all. She obsessively kissed the blonde man, hoping he would stay, but the blonde man, who regained his memory, still chose to leave. Yuri was worried whether everyone could find the activity room. To his surprise, the longtime residents quickly gathered. Yuri pulled back the cover to reveal the group photo. Everyone couldn't help but come closer to take a look. They looked so young and happy in the photo, they could hardly recognize themselves. Some long-buried memories slowly resurfaced. At that time, Mrs. Lobo suddenly went into premature labor. She ran into the elevator to go downstairs to the hospital. The elevator suddenly malfunctioned. Mrs. Lobo had to give birth to the baby by herself. Since this was the first child born in the building, everyone gathered around to take a group photo. Later, Mrs. Lobo found a job singing at a bar, and often left her child home alone, which caused Nicky to wander the hallway every day, until he quietly disappeared. In the empty room, only a dead cat remained. When the neighbors recalled this, they felt puzzled. Why didn't we help this child back then? Just then, the cat owner's family burst in, dragging the chess teacher with them. It turned out he had learned that his daughter had nearly been molested, and had found many inappropriate photos at the teacher's house. Most of them were of Lone. The cat owner believed that even if he turned him over to the police, he would only be locked up for a few months before being released on parole. So he wanted to castrate the man. The residents all raised their hands in agreement, and they fell into a frenzied state of excitement. Yuri saw the black eyes on the wall opening and closing. He realized that it was controlling the residents of the building. In a critical moment, Glenn arrived just in time. He dispersed the gathered crowd. That night, Glenn went to check the heating room. He saw the illusion of his wife again. This time, he was unable to hold on to his principles, and was quickly seduced by the woman in front of him. After a night of passion, Glenn woke up in a puddle of black sludge, just as his father was being entranced. Yuri had already caught the tale of the truth. He was almost certain that there was some creature hidden behind the walls of the building. It was watching our every move, wanting to take away everyone's happiness and hope, feeding on the residents' suffering. As Yuri left the activity room, the homeless man quietly followed behind him. Yuri immediately turned around, but the hallway behind him was empty. Yuri checked the hole his father had made earlier. The tattooed man who had nearly been bitten by a dog appeared. Yuri was so scared that he ran home in one breath. Meanwhile, his father was sitting in the living room, facing an empty chair, as if someone were sitting there. Yuri guessed that his father had already been influenced by the black substance. He hid in his bedroom and observed secretly. Glenn was talking to his wife, but from Yuri's perspective, his father was talking to himself. He found an excuse to sneak out of the house. Meanwhile, under the encouragement of his wife, Glenn was rummaging through Yuri's drawer without permission. He found many doodles inside. Each one conveyed the horrors of the building. Meanwhile, Lone gathered her courage to go to the chess teacher's house. She found that he had been brutally murdered in his home. Glenn found Lone crying in the hallway, and pulled her along to solve the problem. Although the two didn't know how to deal with the unknown creature, they could first destroy the drug workshop to stop the residents from continuing to consume the black substance. They brought in 2 large barrels of gasoline into the workshop. They poured out half. When the drug lord appeared, after listening to Yuri's explanation, he took out a lighter and ignited the gasoline himself. In fact, the drug lord also wanted to escape the nightmares that haunted him every night, but he had never had the courage to do so. As the flames spread rapidly, the 3 hurriedly scrambled out of the workshop. The supply chain of the black substance was thus broken, and the giant eye deep within the building let out an angry roar. Yuri arrived alone at the tattooed man's house. He wanted to apologize for what had happened before. He followed the tattooed man's instructions, applying medicine to his festering wounds. The next second, the black slime began to spread on the walls. That eye actually chased after him. The tattooed man grabbed a dagger and told Yuri to run. Just then, he was taken over by the giant eye and stabbed the dagger into his own throat. Unexpectedly, the monster's power was so strong. Yuri quickly ran home to find his father for help, but Glenn was being controlled by his wife and didn't listen to Yuri's explanation at all, and locked him in the room. At this moment, black slime oozed from the keyhole. The homeless man was kneeling in front of the underground cave. He called the giant eye mother, completely in a submissive posture. The giant eye pointed out that Yuri was a troublemaker and must be eliminated quickly. Soon after, Under the enchantment of his wife, Glenn brought in a psychologist. This person was playing with a familiar toy car. Glenn explained to his son that sending him to the hospital for treatment was the best choice. Yuri knew that his father wasn't listening to anything now, and could only leave with the so-called psychologist. This doctor was actually the homeless man in disguise. After sending his son off, Glenn suddenly remembered that he hadn't even asked about the visiting hours or room number, so he hurriedly called the rehabilitation center, but all he heard was a buzzing sound. Glenn finally realized he had been hypnotized. He went to the monitoring room to try to stop his son from leaving with the doctor. His wife's face appeared on the screen. She picked up a match and lit it, just like when she had died in a fire years ago. The painful memory triggered Glenn's epilepsy. He fell to the ground and kept convulsing. The homeless man brought Yuri to the rooftop. He was dressed exactly like Nikki. Yuri realized that the homeless man was the child who had gone missing 30 years ago. He had been abandoned and ignored by everyone, which is why he was manipulated by the giant eye and became its puppet. Yuri tried to explain to Nikki that the neighbors and his mother ignored him because of the monster behind the wall causing trouble. It was just using him, not out of love. Nikki replied that as long as you are dead, Mother will continue to love me. At this critical moment, the drug lord arrived just in time, but he was no match for Nikki at all. Yuri saw the toy car. He snatched it away, pretending to throw it away. Nikki indeed let the drug lord go. He retrieved the toy car from a distance, taking back the toy car because it was a gift from his mother. The drug lord took the opportunity to rush forward and knocked Nikki down the stairs. Although the monster's puppet was dead, the battle was not over yet. As the few of them just left the rooftop, they saw countless addicts gathering at the staircase. They were desperately digging at the black substance on the walls. Then the cat owner arrived with a group of people. They forcefully drove the addicts away. Glenn woke up to see chaos. He called on everyone through the intercom to stay home and not run around. But the radical cat owner believed it was time to take action to start cleaning the filth from the foundation of the building. He passionately delivered a rallying speech. He didn't notice the increasing number of black spots on the ceiling. Yuri, the drug lord, and Lone arrived at Nikki's house. They wanted to find that eye. Yuri accidentally noticed slime oozing from the oven. He suddenly felt dizzy and fainted. Yuri entered a black space. The eye was staring at Yuri. It uttered a profound statement. "You've seen too much." It turned out that Yuri could see things that others could not, like Nikki and the burned female patient in the next bed. He even guessed that she was his mother. I originally thought that the black stone gave Yuri this special ability, but unexpectedly, in the first second he and his father arrived at the apartment, he saw the entire building wrapped in black slime. Yuri had never told anyone about this ability because his mother had committed suicide due to mental illness. Yuri didn't want to end up like her and be treated like a mental illness. At this moment, the giant eye kept tempting Yuri to ally with it, but the boy refused. The next second, he woke up from the illusion. The oven spewed out scalding gas. The three hurriedly escaped the room in fear. Meanwhile, the mysterious black substance quickly sealed the apartment door. Glenn went out to maintain order. He encountered the cat owner, beating up the drug lord's henchman. He not only didn't stop it, but praised the cat owner for doing a good job. He said that every resident should contribute their own efforts to rebuild order. Glenn told the cat owner to watch the exit until all the toxins were completely cleared from the building. No one could leave, and if anyone saw Yuri, they should bring him to me immediately. Glenn had no idea what he was planning. He quickly announced through the intercom that there might be structural damage in the building, and requested everyone to go to the collective activity room. "I will lead you to the emergency exit." Most residents complied and gathered. Even those who were unwilling to comply would be forcibly taken there by the cat owner. Even Yuri and the others were caught by them. Seeing that the situation was completely under his control, he happily played music throughout the building. The residents crowded in the activity room, unsure of what Glenn was planning. Meanwhile, Yuri was taken to his father's office. Glenn told him that he had ruined everything. That thing was retreating. Without its support, the building would collapse. For so many years, the residents had provided negative emotions for it to feed on, while the black eye maintained the building's balance. But now, Yuri had disrupted that balance. In order to leave the building, the black eye had to gather enough energy, and those residents would become its nourishment tonight. A large amount of black slime oozed from the freezer in the activity room. It draws in the surrounding crowd, gradually devouring the residents. the building begins to shake incessantly. Yuri knows that his father was left with an indelible scar because of his mother's self-immolation. That's why he was enchanted by the black eyes. So he tells his father, "It's not your fault. It was Mom who chose death for herself." Glenn gradually regains consciousness. Under his son's persuasion, the father and son must work together to correct their mistakes. Glenn goes to the activity room to save people. Yuri is going to find that to end everything. Glenn quickly subdues the cat owner. He opened the door to the activity room and led everyone to the garbage room. They could slide into the unloading area through the ventilation shaft. Meanwhile, the Cleo couple was sitting at home waiting to die. They were unwilling to leave the building. They didn't want to leave their child. At this moment, the sound of a baby crying came again from the pipes. Cleo hurried over to check. They actually found their son. The family of 3 was finally reunited. Yuri crawled into the oven of Nikki's house. Sure enough, he entered the black space and found the giant eye. The latter emitted a deep voice, saying, "It's time to go home." Then, it opened an orange passage. Yuri was quickly sucked in. He saw a planet emitting warm light. Meanwhile, Glenn led the residents safely out of the apartment building. He stared at the floor where his son was. He knew that Yuri had already made his choice. This season ends here. No wonder it's a German-produced suspense horror drama. The bizarre and cold architectural style, the eternally insufficient power supply background. Every actor had a face full of deep sorrow. The chilling and oppressive atmosphere permeated the entire show. Every characteristic was very German. Although the ending was somewhat confusing, it should be about an alien creature controlling the building. In the end, it even abducted the male lead, using his energy to return to its home planet. Even if the logic is a bit disjointed, Germans definitely excel at creating a suspenseful atmosphere. If the script could be improved a bit, and the ending explained the background clearly, it would definitely be considered an excellent work. If you enjoy my channel, please click to subscribe.